Welcome to the Yankee Cowboy Podcast, coming to you from Dallas, Texas. Here's your host, Tim Wilkins.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Yankee Cowboy Podcast. I'm the one and the only, last time I checked anyway, Yankee Cowboy joining you once again. Tim Wilkins joining you. And of course, I'm flying solo. This is the week one of the NFL season recap show. And this season and this year, I'm going to be flying solo on the NFL recaps. And I'm going to be experimenting with some technical things behind the scenes here. So I do apologize if my episodes are going to probably come out on Tuesdays, going forward from week 2 on out. And I think really it's going to be important that we all kind of just enjoy this, because there will be some video montages and some segments of the podcast that are going to go video throughout the season. I'm still experimenting with that behind the scenes and kind of give you guys more of a behind the curtain look of the podcast and try to, let everybody enjoy different ways of viewing the podcast to the masses. One of the great things about the podcast, of course, is that I've gone to many conferences, and the big push is to go heavy into the video side. And I've been reluctant to do that, but I think going into the NFL season, that will kind of give me some opportunities as well to kind of experiment with the video side, and also with great content that the NFL season provides. It's going to be some great back and forth discussions. That being said, week one really of the NFL season, you kind of saw all the elaborations of what's to come as a preview of the season. On Thursday night, you saw the Chiefs barely by a toenail win against the Ravens, which very heartbreaking loss for the Ravens. And then the next night on this, it was a game in Brazil, which saw some very, very, it was slow. The first half was pretty slow, or first quarter, I should say, it was pretty slow. And then by the time we got to the fourth quarter, it died back off again on the offensive side of the ball. It just, overall, you saw something different. Maybe it was the grass, or maybe it was something different. But definitely you saw something different there in Brazil. Now, week one, what you saw really, the big storyline for week one, I want everyone to kind of reiterate this, was that you saw a lot of penalties. You saw people getting, illegal formation penalties. You saw people getting a lot of, I would say, illegal contact penalties, and some hands to the face. You always see hands to the face by the defensive side of the ball, and you always see some of these false starts, obviously, and things like that. But you saw one really key call every single game that you watched was the illegal formation. And also this new kickoff, I think I'll have a discussion on that a little bit down the line here on this episode. But I think, it'll be very interesting to see how it plays out further down the line with the season, because once these coaches have some time to experiment with what works and what doesn't, I think we're going to see some dynamics that are going to be really good and competitive for the NFL. Steelers versus the Falcons. Not surprised there by Justin Fields stepping in for Russell Wilson there. Chris Boswell, kicks 6 field goals to win that game. That was a offensive slobber knocker, as they would say, good old JR. The Bills and the Cardinals game was probably the one that really surprised a lot of folks, was how back and forth it was at different times of the game. And the Bills narrowly pulling that out was actually pretty awesome. The Titans and Bears, the Bears win that one against the Titans at home at Chicago. The big surprise really genuinely was the next 2 games I'm about to talk about. And that was the Patriots versus the Bengals. And that game, with Jacoby Brissett being the quarterback for the New England Patriots and not Drake May, you saw something different. And that was that the offense is not dynamic, but Rhamondre Stevenson is definitely going to be a stud when it comes to running the ball. He obviously pushed the ball down the field for the Patriots with 25 carries, 120 yards on the ground, and 1 touchdown. Definitely is going to be a dynamic playmaker for the Patriots down the line. He still is. I mean, he was last year and the year before as well. But I think we're going to see a little bit different. Also, the thing, too, is to watch these Patriots defense. We're not seeing a crazy amount of scoring by the other team that the Patriots are facing. The next game, really, I really want to kind of dive into a little bit is the Texans versus the Colts. And I totally forgot about this in the offseason, that Joe Nixon went down to the Texans and Stephon Diggs went down to the Texans. I did not remember seeing that in the headlines. So for us to see that and see the score being 29-27 Colts, I think we saw something very unique there, that Texans are going to be a wagon to really pay attention to down the stretch here, and they added the AFC South. With the Jacksonville Jaguars and Tennessee Titans pretty much fighting for the bottom of the cellar of the AFC South, the Colts and the Texans are going to go back and forth, I believe. They're going to definitely be competitive here in the next 3 years once you get these young quarterbacks developed. And that's really going to be key. The next game, I think, is a dynamic that I talk about next that I'm very intrigued by with the Dolphins. And that is, the Dolphins and the Jaguars, the Battle of Florida, as I like to call it, is that this game wasn't really much of entertainment. It was terrible. A lot of this 7-0, 10-7 touchdown by the Dolphins in the third, and then 2 field goals by the Dolphins down the stretch there in the game. They're in Miami. Yes, it's humid, it's hot, but so is Jacksonville's used to it. They play in Florida too. And that's just what it is. I mean, that game was terrible to watch. Tua had 338 yards passing and only 1 touchdown. Tyreek Hill had pretty much a monster's day, a lot of bomb throws, and obviously the storyline of the day for Tyreek Hill was the traffic stop that kind of just went awry. If you ask me, it probably should have went differently, and it should have went differently. He says it. As of this recording, I could have done something different. I could have been a little bit. You don't have to be nice to the officers, but you at least got to listen. You can fight all this bullshit in court. Anyone that's ever been pulled over before for something that they don't think they did, they understand. We all listen. The guy's got a job to do, so do you. Push it on down the road, right? I think you can fight to live another day, right? Let's just say that now. My judgment on that is the officer was definitely in the wrong for being rude, but Tyreek definitely didn't make it any easier for him either, with rolling up the windows and doing some of the antics that he was doing. None of those were illegal. Rolling up the windows and things like that. I think you got up underneath the officer's skin a little bit, and he's going to pull you out of the car and make your life hard. And, because he can. Now, he's on administrative leave. He might lose his job. Shit like that kind of happens. It's unfortunate that you have that in the world that we live in today, that, you don't deal with, officers don't deal with the greatest of humankind. They deal with all walks of life. So you kind of have to go in that perspective. I'm glad Tyreek Hill made out of it. He did a pretty damn good job of that game. The next game, I really just, I hate to describe this, but it's just downright terrible. It's going to be the cellar. It's a dumpster fire, and that is the Carolina Panthers. Okay. The New Orleans Saints, they're going to be a dynamite team once they get down the stretch here. And once they the Saints do what they're going to do. Derek Carr was only 200 yards passing, but he had 3 touchdowns. Alvin Kamara had 15 carries for 83 yards, only one touchdown. You could see that team's going to be a wagon out of the NFC South. Be going against Tampa Bay and Baker Mayfield. I think the Saints are definitely going to be up there. The Minnesota Vikings against the Giants. I'm sorry, the Giants are just going to be the bottom of the barrel too. I think they're going to be worse off than the Washington Commanders. Legitimately, I think the Giants are going to be worse than the Washington Commanders. I think that it's going to be a terrible game. The couple games down the stretch, down in the, I will say the season schedule is unique, and anyone that doesn't have so already, I recommend getting your NFL Sunday ticket on YouTube, and because you also get the NFL Red Zone as well, and that's a really great thing. You can watch multiple games at the same time, and if you don't want to watch, you have NFL Red Zone, which is arguably any fan that's ever watched NFL Red Zone, that is a unique way to watch the NFL, the NFL like regular block of games. So when you have all that, it's definitely unique to watch NFL football that way. But I think the games were spread around pretty evenly between the 12 o'clock and the 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock games for you East Coasters, the 12 and 3 for the Central Time Zone, and for the Pacific Time Zone. You guys had a unique spread of games. I think you guys had to be up pretty fucking early to catch the good ones you want to catch. The one game that I would say that was kind of a eye opener to me was Dak Prescott got a huge contract extension right before the game was announced. Right before the game started, they announced the contract extension for like $240 million against the Browns, and the offense put up 33 points on the Browns. That's definitely going to be a unique dynamic going down the stretch. The Cowboys, in my view, are going to be unique in one way or the other. They're either going to be really bad or really good. And one thing about living in this area, living in Dallas, is that everyone loves their Cowboys when they're doing really good. And when they're doing really bad, they hate their guts. But when they're doing really good, everyone's on that bandwagon. When they're playing like trash, they're calling for Jerry, they're calling for Mike McCarthy, they're calling for everyone and their mother. So I expect no different by like week 8 of the season. I expect no different, and kind of how that plays out. The Seahawks and Broncos, I think, remarkably, was one of the cool games of the week. Was kind of under the radar of being, two coaches that were brand new, kind of, between Sean Payton being with the Broncos and the Seahawks being with a new coach, new organization for the Broncos when it comes to Bo Nix, obviously, being a quarterback there in Denver. The Seattle Seahawks have Geno Smith, who's remarkably been a utility quarterback playing for multiple organizations. And this does really well. And they won 26-20. So the other game that was really surprising before the Sunday night game was the Commanders and the Buccaneers, which shows me the promise of potentially the Commanders is that Jaden Daniels ran 16 times for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's going to be a unique experience for the Washington Commander fans, is seeing legitimately a organization that is going to put a lot of they always kind of drafted these quarterbacks that kind of have legs and they have an arm. So I'll be very interested to see where they go down the stretch. But Baker Mayfield had 289 yards and 4 touchdown throws. So that tells you that was a very balanced offense. Chris Godwin had 8 receptions for 83 yards and a touchdown. So that was a balanced offense side of the ball for the Buccaneers. And it was a 37-20 game. So it wasn't really too close, but it wasn't out of reach by a lot. So, I mean, it really – the game also for California's sake, you got the Raiders of Las Vegas versus the Chargers. And that was obviously the first game for Jim Harbaugh. I think it's Jim. Yeah, it is Jim Harbaugh. being the coach of the LA Chargers, pretty much making his return to the California area, and being a head coach at the NFL level. The last time he was a coach at the NFL level was the San Francisco 49ers, who he was a remarkable coach. There was no question about that. He really was a remarkable coach at the NFL level the first time he was here. And this was no different on his first experience as a head coach here. Chargers win 22-10. J.K. Dobbins, who was a former running back of the Baltimore Ravens, rushes for 135 yards on his first game as a Charger. And I think legitimately J.K. Dobbins is going to be if you're having for a fantasy football, going to be an amazing talent down the line. And I think, it depends on, listen, if you want to talk about fantasy football and all those lovely things, it all depends on what you're playing. I'll tell it to every single person that's ever played fantasy football. I do fantasy football. It is about the type of league that you're playing with, who you're playing against, the bragging rights or what you're playing. Because there's some people that are really hyper competitive that do certain things, that watch the waiver wire, and some people do the draft. I can kind of go on and on about that. It all varies based on the type of league, though. If you're on a pass, your points per reception or PPR, you're going to have to kind of – you're definitely in a league amongst the men amongst boys. The standard leagues, you kind of have the luxury of you can round out your roster. A PPR, you have to draft heavy on running backs that not only do well on the ground, but also do well in the catch. Week in and week out, and you kind of have to watch yourself on some of these matchups and just really do well. And the Rams versus the Lions was no exception about watching up matchups. The Rams have a banged up offensive line, which you saw that when you watched the game, and Stafford got he got rushed pretty often. Jared Goff did his thing. I mean, there was a lot of running, a lot of passing, but at the same time, I think that game was definitely the essence of what the NFL is going to be all year. I think the play calling by these coaches is going to be more well-rounded. I know it's a lot of pass-heavy league. I understand that. There's no question about that. But I think we're going to see more ground and pound here in the first, 6 to 8 weeks of the season because of these guys that maybe had holdouts, or maybe these guys don't have, they have injuries or nagging injuries. So you're going to see a lot of that. By the time week 8 comes around to these seasons, though, you're going to see the teams that have two running backs that are very good or very equal to each other kind of start pulling ahead of the pack, because they're going to be able to be more well-rounded in the offensive side of the ball. I think the Lions is going to be a really good team down the stretch here. I think the first couple of weeks there's going to be some iffy situations, but Dan Campbell's going to do Dan Campbell things, and Dan Campbell's going to do what Dan Campbell does best, and that's just put the right foot in front of the next foot and just keep on going. Definitely was probably one of the better Sunday night games I've had to watch. And I think for the NFL to open up their first week of the season that way was pretty awesome, with the scheduling of the NBC primetime game being on Sunday after coming off of the Ravens and the Chiefs as a Thursday night opener. It was pretty awesome. I think that's a good way to end out the weekend. The Jets versus the 49ers game, I'm sorry to tell everybody this, but Brandon Ayuk, you hold out all that damn time, do all that nonsense, and you drop the ball in the end zone. And that was a rough way to go. For the Jets to lose that game, which they did, they lost that game 32-19, isn't really indicative of how that game was going. It was very sloppy, is a nice way of putting it. Definitely a lot of things that could be improved. But I think overall, if you keep in mind what's going on here, it's the first week of football, right? It's also Aaron Rodgers' first real game as a Jet. If everyone remembers correctly, he was only 3 snaps into his playing career as a New York Jet before he suffered that injury that kept him out. So I think for him to return to the NFL, not only to return to the NFL, but return to it in the Bay Area, was a very good experience. I know they spoiled it. The Niners win that game, but I think there's plenty more where that came from with the Jets. I think the Jets are going to be competitive this year. I think it's just a matter of against who and how they go about doing things. My big takeaways of week 1, guys, are going to be, penalties, and penalties. How many more penalties can my fandom, maintain? Because, I understand it's the first couple weeks of the season, but, man, is it wearing my ass out seeing these flags on the field. I think there's more laundry on the ground than there is in my laundry basket. So that's the theme of the week there for that. Also, sloppy play by some of these players that have been in the league a very long time. Quarterback play was not that great. I think the average QBR rating was 77 for some of these rookie quarterbacks as well. They weren't having their best days either. So I think going down the stretch, I think there's going to be a lot of work to do, a lot of cleanup by the teams about what they need to do on the penalty side. Some of these false starts, these early nonsense things. Injuries are going to be pretty pushy going forward. I think we all need to understand that the injuries that you're going to see coming down the stretch, especially like, for example, Christian McCaffrey, that to me is going to be very interesting to see down the stretch. Christian McCaffrey is definitely a one-on-one when it comes to that position. So for him to have any kind of injury of the foot is going to be different. So I hope everyone understands that going down the line. That's going to be my big takeaway. Also, I think by week 5, maybe week 5 to week 8, we're going to start seeing some of these teams that were iffy, how good they actually are. And I hope you get to see that. I hope we get to see more awesome quarterback play, which I don't think we're going to see until like week 4 when everyone kind of gets their, all the stuff right. Because these guys didn't have a long training camp and a lot of game day reps. So I think we're going to start seeing that clean up a lot too. So I appreciate everyone joining me for week 1's NFL season recap show. I'll see you next week for week 2.